And now, your daily dose of debate, breaking news, and uncensored views. This is the Michael Medved Show.
And another great day in this greatest nation on God's green earth. Another great week in this greatest nation. Maybe another great year in this greatest nation on God's green earth. Certainly, we began with a great success for the American military. Nobody is questioning that. What happened in Venezuela was extraordinarily well planned. It was well executed. Was it a big triumph for the United States? Well, there's one question that has yet to be answered, which is what happens next? What is supposed to happen next? There appears to be a disagreement, even though it is not acknowledged, between the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who was also the National Security Advisor for the President, and the President of the United States. The President of the United States says we're going to be running the government of Venezuela at least for a little while. And the Secretary of State says no. And their disagreement is actually the very front page of the New York Times. The front page article this morning, seeming to pivot, Rubio says U.S. will not run Venezuela. The oil quarantine, he says, will keep a grip on Caracas. Secretary of State Marco Rubio yesterday appeared to pivot away from President Trump's assertions a day earlier that the United States would run Venezuela, emphasizing instead that the administration would keep a military quarantine in place on the country's oil exports to exert leverage on the new leadership there. The new leadership there are supporters of Nicolas Maduro. And in fact, the current president, Delcy Rodriguez, who is a loyalist to Maduro, she says she is serving, because she was vice president, as the acting president of Venezuela. But she believes that Maduro, who is charged in a federal indictment today, this morning, he's charged with narco-terrorism, conspiracy, cocaine importation conspiracy, possession of machine guns and destructive devices, and conspiracy to possess machine guns and destructive devices. He has previously denied all of these allegations. He also got a high-profile lawyer who is going to be representing him in this ongoing legal action here in the United States. He's arrived in New York. His lawyer is going to be the same lawyer who represented Julian Assange. Didn't do so well for Julian Assange, the gentleman from WikiLeaks. You remember? Maduro is 63, so it's unclear how long he is going to spend in American custody. John Yoo, meanwhile, the great legal scholar at the University of California at Berkeley and the University of Texas at Austin. He teaches at both School of Civic Leadership and the Civitas Institute at the University of Texas at Austin. John Yoo is going to be joining us, and he says, look, the Trump administration's actions in Venezuela are constitutional. And he cites other decisions made by prior presidents. The question as to how well those decisions worked out, unclear. But what is clear, so says Professor Hugh, who we'll be speaking to on the Medved Show, what he does say is clear is that there is no constitutional objection. But that's not true politically. The headline from CNN, divided Congress. With everything else going on in South America, and the president of Colombia, who is an ally and supporter of Maduro, and he's the president of Colombia. His name is Gustavo Petro, and he issued a stark warning to Donald Trump after the capture of Nicolas Maduro sent shockwaves around the world. What his statement was Trump, come and get me. I'm waiting. This is supposed to be a huge taunt to Trump. You would think that it might not be the best possible time when Trump is feeling pretty good about the success of the mission in Venezuela. Meanwhile, Congress returns from recess today amid bitter policy fights and the looming threat of a government shutdown. Hey, remember that. The shutdown is back, coming up at the end of the month. Can you believe it? This is going to actually, I think, cast a shadow on the State of the Union address that I'm sure President Trump is working on already now, which is supposed to occur before the end of January, to be timed together with a new government shutdown. This is all amazing. Lawmakers must also grapple with questions of military oversight after President Trump's surprise attack in Venezuela, which removed Nicolas Maduro without notifying Congress. House Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune are now facing pressure from within their own party, that's the Republican Party, over whether to reassert legislative authority on war powers, all while navigating high-stakes votes on health care and government spending ahead of this fall's midterm elections, and not to mention the possible shutdown that could be happening in a matter of weeks. Senator Rand Paul is introducing a bill later this week on that issue. And meanwhile, Wikipedia is reporting that protests occurred across the country and internationally as the Maduro administration initiated Operation Ton Ton, a crackdown on dissent. This dissent has not done that well in Venezuela. That's one of the many, many problems with the evil Maduro regime. Some world leaders rejected the claimed results and recognized this has to do with the election they had in 2024. This is from a year ago, right after that election, when it said protests occurred across the country and internationally as the Maduro administration initiated Operation Ton Ton, a crackdown on dissent. Some world leaders rejected the Venezuela's claimed results and recognized Gonzalez as Edmundo Gonzalez as the election winner. He's still available, by the way, and no one has called him. And the surprise is that President Trump did not call Machado, who is the Nobel Peace Prize winner, which may be why President Trump didn't call her. Yeah, he feels he was robbed. Say it ain't so, Joe. No, she won the Nobel Peace Prize, not him. So he didn't pick up the phone, and he actually communicated and got roundly criticized for it. He communicated that she didn't have enough support in the nation of Venezuela to exert power. And Maduro did not cede power and instead asked the Supreme Tribunal of Justice, composed of justices loyal to Maduro, to audit and approve the results. He stole the election, in other words. Now, surprising that Trump didn't bring him up to justice on that issue, given Trump's concern with stolen elections. We'll be speaking with John Yoo about the constitutionality and legality of all these goings-on coming up. And it's always an honor, a distinct honor on the Michael Medved Show to welcome to the show John Yoo, who is a professor at the University of California at Berkeley Law School. He is also a distinguished visiting scholar at the School of Civic Leadership and the Civitas Institute at the University of Texas at Austin. And he is a non-resident senior fellow at American Enterprise Institute. His extremely timely and very well-argued piece appeared today in National Review under the headline, "You, the Trump administration's actions in Venezuela are constitutional." The key element of the argument that you make, which goes back and looks at other decisions that were made by prior U.S. presidents that seemed to work out for the country. What is the core of the constitutionality argument for this action, military action in Venezuela?
Michael, great to be with you. Happy 2026. I think
let's hope.
The main claim of critics is that Congress has to approve all uses of force by the president because of the declare war clause. And my first argument is based on practice. That's never been the way presidents and Congresses have acted. You can start with Thomas Jefferson with the Barbary pirates back in the 1800s, where Congress didn't give him any permission, but he sent a small fleet out to the Mediterranean and tried to overthrow these princes who were taking Americans hostage off of American ships. But you could carry it forward to the closest parallel to what happened over the weekend, which is in 1989, President George H.W. Bush sent in the military to overthrow the regime of Manuel Noriega and brought him back for trial. And Noriega was convicted in court and spent the rest of his life in jail. But I think people who criticize President Trump should at least be consistent about this. So if people think President Trump's attack on Venezuela was unconstitutional, did they raise the same objections when President Obama used force to overthrow Gaddafi in Libya, or President Clinton used force to overthrow Slobodan Milosevic and end the invasion of Kosovo by the Serbians, or the Korean War? We could go on and talk about presidents who have, as commander-in-chief, used the armed forces of a kind that Congress bought and paid for to try to protect the nation's security.
And so basically you're saying it's constitutional. The question that I think is on everybody's minds right now is, constitutional or not, what's next? The president says we're going to be running Venezuela for a while. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, says not so fast. We won't really be running the country. Which is it? Where are we?
Well, I think, Michael, this is a question. There's a question of law and a question of policy. And I have to say I worked on very similar issues in 2003 when I was in the Bush administration about what we were going to do after the invasion of Iraq. And we won so successfully that we had to immediately start thinking about how to reconstruct the country. Legally, if we're at war with Venezuela and then the new government invites us in and consents to us participating in the rebuilding of Venezuela, there's no legal issue. And that's essentially what happened in Iraq. Or even if the United States were to actually in some way become the occupying power in Venezuela after we've successfully won a war, we're still allowed to use oil revenues, for example, and use it to rebuild the country. I don't think the legality is going to, although I do think Congress will have to be involved at this point because it involves new appropriations. It involves hiring more people and sending them down to Venezuela to help rebuild. But I don't think that's the hard question. I agree with you, Michael. The harder question is political, because in order for us to be able to rebuild, we need to create a stable political situation. Companies and Americans aren't going to want to go to Venezuela unless they know the environment's secure, unless they can invest money securely, unless they know that their rights are going to be respected. And that's going to really involve creating a political system that's going to be stable and reliable. And I think ultimately that's going to be democratic.
Well, you talk about an alternate political system. One of the things that President Trump has drawn strong criticism about concerning his statement after the very successful extraction of Maduro and Maduro's wife is the fact that he dismissed the possibility of working with the Venezuelan opposition, including his competitor for the Nobel Peace Prize, Machado. He said that she doesn't have the kind of popular support that would make her a viable alternative to Maduro. So instead, right now, they're working with Delcy Rodriguez, who's the vice president, who says she's just an interim president, that Maduro is still the real president. What's the right play for our president?
I mean, that's a tough question. I actually think that the United States will have to bring in Machado. I think he'll have to bring in Gonzalez, who was the official opposition candidate in the election. I believe he's sitting in exile in Spain right now. Those were the people who were democratically elected in elections just a few months ago. I think that what President Trump's probably doing is, and I think Secretary Rubio are saying they're willing to work with the existing people in power in Venezuela as part of a transition, I hope, to a more democratically elected government. But I also think it would be very hard for the United States to work with, on a permanent basis, the same security, the same military elites and the regimes that have been in power under Chavez and Maduro, because you're just going to get, Maduro version 2.0 and nothing will have significantly changed. From our interests, we want Venezuela not just to stop running drugs, but to stop being a hub for all of our opponents like Russia, Iran, and China that want to establish a foothold in the Western Hemisphere. And I think for that, you need to have a more democratically responsible government in place.
This brings up another question that we can get to with this dramatic event and very successfully implemented by the U.S. military and a big triumph for our Defense Department. Notice I didn't say the Department of War. People are acting, which country is next? There was a statement by Prime Minister Frederiksen of Denmark who said to Trump, don't try this about Greenland right now. What would be the next target based upon the same logic behind our targeting of Venezuela? We will get to that with Professor John Yoo of the University of California at Berkeley and formerly of the Bush administration, coming back up on the Medved Show.
Medved.
On the Michael Medved Show today, we're honored to have John Yoo with us. Professor Yoo is a distinguished visiting scholar at the University of Texas at Austin and the Emanuel S. Heller Professor of Law at the University of California at Berkeley. He's also a non-resident senior fellow with the American Enterprise Institute. He has written an article saying the Trump administration's actions in Venezuela are constitutional. The New York Times, not surprisingly, doesn't agree with you, Professor. And they write in their editorial this morning that if there is an overriding lesson of American foreign affairs in the past century, it is that attempting to oust even the most deplorable regime can make matters worse. The United States spent 20 years failing to create a stable government in Afghanistan and replaced a dictatorship in Libya with a fractured state. The tragic consequences of the 2003 war in Iraq continue to beset America and the Middle East. To prevent a repetition of that kind of frustration, that kind of setback for our country, what should President Trump and Secretary of State Rubio and the Department of Defense under Pete Hegseth, what should they keep in mind to avoid those setbacks?
Okay, so just to remind you, I did work at the beginning of the occupation of Iraq after victory, but I left in the end of the summer of 2003, so I wasn't really there to see it through. But some of the things that I think we've learned from Iraq and Afghanistan, and let me add, by the way, I think Iraq in the end turned out to be a success, although at great cost. I mean, Iraq is today a parliamentary democracy, and I think it's Afghanistan that was really the failure. I think one thing they should keep in mind is that Venezuela is a very different place than the Middle East. Venezuela, until Chavez showed up, had several decades of a well-functioning democracy. It was one of the richest countries in the world before Chavez and Maduro, I think, looted the country, and Cuba made its influence, spread its influence to the Venezuelan military and intelligence services. So I think you already had institutions and knowledge of democracy and free markets there that you didn't have in the Middle East. I also don't think that this is something that's going to be achieved, as we tried in Iraq and Afghanistan, by the American military trying to impose a kind of order with troops in Venezuela. That's maybe what was. And here, maybe the New York Times is getting at that. That I don't think it's true that the United States has often or always failed in replacing dictatorships with democracies. In fact, I think we've had a lot of successes. You could look at Japan and Germany after World War II, South Korea,
but what a cost.
Taiwan, the Philippines. Yes, at great cost. In some of these places at great cost. Some of these places not at such great cost if you've got a cooperative and willing population. And I think that's the key, is that I think that's why President Trump might have misspoken, or he's going to change his views. I think he really does have to work with the Democratic opposition in Venezuela, which really represents, as according to the poll results, a huge majority of the Venezuelan people want to return back to democracy. So it's not that the United States is going to be imposing an alien foreign system on the people of Venezuela. And so I think it's not going to require massive troop occupation or presence. And if it did, I don't think the Trump administration would be interested in that anyway.
What about this idea that there are other countries that should be worried? In particular, Denmark, which wants to maintain its hold on Greenland.
You can never take your eyes off those tricky Danes.
Well, it is in Canada, where
them too.
Trump has spoken again and again.
Yeah. They tried to steal the World Series from us.
Yeah, but it didn't work.
Yeah, it didn't work.
Yes, but Mexico, for goodness sake, we had a successful war against Mexico before in the 1840s. And what about the Russian Federation itself? In other words, if you are taking the principle that it is legitimate to look at countries that are dysfunctional and disruptive to world peace, could you use, if this is a success in Venezuela, the same kind of logic to justify other adventures like this?
Well, I think this is one area, where whatever is the MAGA foreign policy and then traditional American strategy actually converge. I wasn't a great fan of the Trump national security strategy that was issued
right.
a few weeks ago. Yeah, but the one thing, remember we talked about it, that there is a lot of agreement on, is that the United States has to put more teeth to the Monroe Doctrine in the sense of preventing outside countries like Iran and China and Russia acting through Cuba or acting directly to try to undermine democracy, undermine free markets in our own hemisphere.
That several times in the last 48 hours, President Trump has described it as the Don-Roe Doctrine.
Well, and the other thing, I've been on some TV shows over the weekend where I saw Democrats disavowing the Monroe Doctrine. And I was like, this would come as great news to Jefferson and Monroe, some of the founders of your party.
And John Quincy Adams, who actually wrote the Monroe Doctrine.
Yes, as Secretary of State, exactly. I mean, this was one of the great achievements of early democratic foreign policy in the United States, was to try to prevent the European empires from returning to the Western Hemisphere. And so I think that if you look at it with that lens, and I'm not claiming President Trump is thinking about this in this way, but I think that one way to explain what's happened here is that this is like the Monroe Doctrine, getting rid of the outside influences have basically frustrated the democratic will of the Venezuelan people. And then are there other countries in South America that could be similarly described? And you would have to say Colombia would be a country where they might have a lot of words. And I actually saw on TV this morning, they're already to start. Colombia's already starting to station troops and defensive posture.
President Petro said, "Come and get me," to President Trump. Speaking of come and get me, Rand Paul, senator from Kentucky, is going to be introducing new legislation that would require congressional approval for any other decision like this. Is that a good idea?
I think it would be unconstitutional because I don't think that Congress is allowed to pass laws that restrict what the Constitution gives to the president. If Rand Paul or any other senator wants to prevent presidents from doing this, then they don't have to fund SEAL Team 6. They don't have to fund the massive offensive firepower that the American military enjoys. The American military is the only military probably that could carry out that kind of operation. Congress doesn't have to fund it. But instead, what they want to do is fund those capabilities, give them to the president, and then take no responsibility for how they're used until once Congress sees whether it was successful or not.
Well, he's very unlikely to get a majority to back him up, Senator Paul, on this. Meanwhile, we will keep track of all these developments regarding other nations, particularly Colombia, and we'll continue to follow the always enlightened and challenging and informative commentary of John Hugh. And again, you would be looking for a deal with a transition to democratic government.
Yes, I think, and also that would be in the best interest of the people who are in the existing regime if they want any hope of any kind of reconciliation or immunity in a new Venezuela.
Thank you so much, John Hugh. You can read his article most recently at the National Review. It's linked at our website at michaelmedved.com. And we will be right back on the Michael Medved Show. Happy New Year, John.
Here's a special discount, 50% off just for being a MedHead annual member. Join today at michaelmedved.com.
And on the Michael Medved Show, there is a great deal of disagreement, even within the Trump administration, about what the purpose of our daring, bold, and brilliantly executed strike on Venezuela is for. What is the purpose? Where do we go from here? What is the reason for taking these steps against Venezuela and sending our young men and women into battle? What is the purpose for doing that in this situation? And we mentioned before, and I was discussing with John Yoo, the professor of law and former aide to foreign policy law for the Bush administration. And I think it's very clear that the conflicting messages as to how these actions are justified. Marco Rubio has said this is all about a dictator who oppresses his people. Okay? Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, as he styles himself, has said this is all about drugs, which pose an imminent threat, which is very different. That's why we had actually begun killing people and sinking so-called drug boats more than a month ago. It's been a long time and a lot of different attacks. And meanwhile, President Trump talks about Venezuela's oil and America's need for that Venezuelan oil. So which is it? Why are we doing this? And the fact that there are very few Americans, it seems to me, who could give you a quick, persuasive explanation for taking these steps. Is this about the fraudulent election that was apparently stolen? And on this one, there's no real question that the election was stolen, because after that election in 2024, the Supreme Court ruling was rejected by the United States, the European Union, and Latin American countries. 10 Latin American countries rejected the idea that Maduro was actually reelected. He wasn't. He lost in a landslide to Edmundo Gonzalez. And meanwhile, an arrest warrant was issued on the 2nd of September, this is 2024, for Edmundo Gonzalez, who was actually the victorious candidate for the alleged crimes of usurpation of functions, falsification of public documents, instigation to disobey the law, conspiracy and association, that according to Reuters. After seeking asylum in the Spanish embassy in Caracas, Gonzalez left for Spain on the 7th of September of 2024. And Maduro was sworn in for what would be his third and final term on the 10th of January 2025, so a year ago. Gonzalez flew to Spain, where he received his right of asylum. But the United States clearly can't make a precedent that says that every time there is cheating in an election, we're going to send in our troops and our drones and our helicopters. And again, Saddam Hussein had elections like this. Vladimir Putin has elections like this all the time. And which is one of the reasons he does so successfully, winning 96% and things of that nature. So the difficulty here is that what we need to do, and this has to be the top priority for the Trump administration, is to go ahead and to help install a truly democratic government to replace the Maduro government, so you have an alternative that is on the table. And that haunting question of, okay, now what, doesn't all of a sudden arise after the guns have started, after the casualties have been endured. Thank God it appears that no Americans were killed, though some Americans suffered casualties. They were wounded. And there are certainly people on the Venezuelan side who lost their lives. All of this goes to the statements that were made immediately after the military operation. President Trump announced it in a 20-minute speech. This is the president speaking about this right after the operation that was successful over the weekend. President of the United States, clip 18.
Late last night and early today, at my direction, the United States Armed Forces conducted an extraordinary military operation in the capital of Venezuela. Overwhelming American military power, air, land, and sea, was used to launch a spectacular assault, and it was an assault like people have not seen since World War II. It was a force against a heavily fortified military fortress in the heart of Caracas to bring outlaw dictator Nicolas Maduro to justice. This was one of the most stunning, effective, and powerful displays of American military might and competence in American history.
Okay, again, it was a successful mission, but you can't really say how successful a mission is, can you? Until you're saying what the purpose is. And is the purpose for us to take over Venezuela? Well, President Trump in his speech on Sunday kind of made that implication. Then you'll go to President Trump On clip 14.
Until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. So we don't want to be involved with having somebody else get in and we have the same situation that we had for the last long period of years. So we are going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. And it has to be judicious because that's what we're all about. We want peace, liberty, and justice for the great people of Venezuela.
Part of what's difficult here for President Trump is when he was running for president, he emphasized that he was going to be a president who stopped wars. And here you have a president who very much is starting one. There's no getting away from it. And the way that Pete Hegseth at the same press conference on Sunday spoke about Maduro really raises all kinds of questions. I mean, not just about Maduro, but about Pete Hegseth. Here's the Secretary of War, clip 6.
Nicolas Maduro had his chance, just like Iran had their chance, until they didn't and until he didn't. He effed around and he found out.
Okay, basically, this makes it sound like a schoolyard argument. And clearly, when you're talking about a country of 30 million people, and Venezuela is that many people, a country, as Professor Yu was just saying, which at one time was one of the most prosperous, if not the most prosperous in all of Latin America, partially because of the oil wealth. And is the purpose of this military mission that President Trump authorized, is the key purpose about oil and getting increased supplies of oil for the United States, which is already leading the world in that capacity? Coming up, we'll talk about the reactions to this strike and the political ramifications of what is going on, and also the surprising and very spirited reaction of Denmark. How is Denmark involved? It's unbelievable. We will get to that and to more coming up as the year begins with the Dow Jones creating all kinds of excitement and positive developments in these early days of 2026. Let us hope that can continue as well. For behalf of this greatest nation on God's green earth,